The name of this festival, Another World is Possible, is inspired by a 1994 letter that Subcomandante Marcos, the spokesperson of the Zapatistas' indigenous liberation movement, wrote to the people and governments of the world. And it's that driving concept of this other world, this better world, that's at the cusp of our imagination that drives the vision of Eaton. And we wanted to, especially during this groundbreaking year of 2020 and the challenges that everyone has faced, to create a virtual convening space to bring together our community and share these stories of belonging and liberation. Eaton Workshop is now 6 years in the making and 2 years open at our locations in DC and Hong Kong. Our mission is to build platforms that offer conditions for the self and the collective to actualize. I've taken my biggest influences in life, grassroots activism, underground art and music, and holistic wellness, and channeled that into the properties that have under one roof cinema, artist studios, music venues, community radio stations, and I wanted this space to really reflect that sense of something more profound.
Partnering with the right people in the community to make sure that we create a space that's protected, despite all of the systemic challenges of any aged industry like this one.
Do you want to be estranged from the community, or do you want to be part of the community? And I think it's easy for a business to just have profit in mind, but if you want to be part of the community, you have to have other things that are part of that bottom line.
Physically, for folks having a space to hold their meetings, for people coming from around the country to have a place to stay when they bring their struggle to the halls of Congress. Having this as a hub, it's critical, not only for our local folks, but also for our national and international activist community.
Re-envision how it uses spaces, how it could be a space of generosity, how it could help revive imagination, how it wanted to be a space for art and culture and also for social change.
What Another World looks like is finding our passions and being able to live in it and allowing for those things to support community, to creatively live out our life and be in community with one another, be in deep and right relationship with one another.
Another world is possible. It's not just something that's far off that one day we'll achieve. Rich, poor, black, white, indigenous, any color, living self-actualization, that is the beginning of a fractal that spins outward and touches all of us. I think back on older relatives, elders in my life and ancestors and everything the struggle that they were engaged in, and it's because their process of liberation, everything they accomplished so that I can live in this way, that was their own liberation. They lived it themselves. Our realities are also different, whether we're here on K Street or we're in the mountains in Chiapas, or we're in the bayou in Louisiana or in the redwoods in California. We can accomplish so much in this lifetime.
With this festival, Another World is Possible, the films and the content are no longer just films. They become part of a larger social change movement and an imagining of a better world.
Latia Casey Camp Hornick, Environmental Ambassador for the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma. Want to say thank you to Eaton Workshops, Another World is Possible, and the support of Movement Rights. Movement Rights is a small nonprofit that helps us to support the rights of nature, and for the Ponca people, we have put that into a statute with the help of Movement Rights. And we also work hard on Indigenous rights and sovereignty and fight hard against the fossil fuel regime, doing the destructive work that they're doing against our Mother Earth. We know that this time is important for all of us to join together and to build this new system of belief that understands that we must live in harmony with all that is. And for those reasons, we're asking for your support. We'd like to ask you to donate to Movement Rights to help us to build even stronger movement together. And we would invite you as well to the December 5th showing of the Condor and the Eagle. And you get more information there. And I personally am asking you to sign a petition that Governor Stitt of Oklahoma is using as an attack on Indigenous sovereignty, another land grab on Indigenous people's territory. We need your help. Please join us. Thank you.
Hey guys, this is Adrian Yu, the arts filmmaker behind Dreamrave. Dreamrave is a piece that I created last year, 2019, in Hong Kong Art Basel. And it's actually two pieces in one. It included an installation, but also a companion film. And both these pieces kind of work hand in hand, right? It dealt with the same sort of themes of collective dreaming, the collapsing of physical and digital spaces together, to simulate the 5 stages of sleep. It's this process of ego death. And I think that this film captures a lot of the same sort of notions together. Shot it in New York and in Hong Kong with a bunch of my friends. So I'm really excited to kind of have it finally out and hope you enjoy.
Hello. What shall we call you? Hello. What shall we call you? You awaken.
I just will just kind of like want to introduce everyone. So, I'm Adrian Yu, the artist and filmmaker behind Dreamrave, and the people I've gathered here, the collaborators I've worked on Dreamrave, and good friend Millie. So maybe you guys want to just talk a little about yourselves, and we'll just kind of dive in. Whoever wants to go first?
I can jump in first.
My
name's Ian Glover. I'm like a designer, developer, artist, and most of my practice is building interactive experiences, primarily online, some offline as well. And Dreamrave was super exciting because it was a project that kind of like engaged both parts of those practices, exploring kind of how the web and the internet was touching, people who were interacting with the experience in a physical capacity, people who were only interacting maybe with their phone, even while they were at the space in a sense. And then also, people who are at home or anywhere else in the world being able to kind of like have a different experience mediated through the web take on how this could be perceived.
Cool. Millie or Danny, want to jump in?
Okay, yeah. I'm Millie Kai. I'm an independent curator and writer, and also currently the associate director at Ippodo Gallery in the Upper East Side at New York. And my research practice deals with the mediated space, so the virtual space, relationships that we build through online platforms, and it's diving a little bit more into surveillance theory. I've worked at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago on specifically the I Was Raised on the Internet show. And yeah, just moved to New York last year and just been working here since.
Hello, I'm Danny L. Harle. I'm a musician from London, and I guess I trained in classical music as a classical composer, like writing down notes and stuff. And then I suddenly realized what I thought was my hobby for electronic music was actually my main sort of serious output. And the classical music I was writing was my hobby. But just because of like what in my mind was the more serious of the two, which is classical music, of course, I had focused on that, when in fact, actually, yeah, it was the other way around. And in my sort of experience of writing electronic music, I've always, at the heart of it, had a love for rave music and hardcore rave music, as it's known as in the UK. The word hardcore is used to mean a lot of things, but yes, in the UK it's known as hardcore. But the style of rave music that I particularly like is what I define as euphoric rave music, and that is a word that comes up a lot in terms of in any kind of aesthetic or musical discussion that I have. And that's what attracted me to the Dreamrave project.
Amazing. Yeah, I can't believe it's been over a year. Honestly, it was very difficult for me. I was like sitting in bed like earlier today thinking about when Dreamrave actually happened. And I realized, I thought it was 2 years ago, but I guess it only was last year, right? Like, it was such a strange...
I'm not even sure it actually happened.
Yeah. It's so bizarre, and and I think that it took a while, like the installation itself was very beautiful, and we had this film as well that we kind of like I made as a companion film right after installation, I guess during the installation, and it took about a year for it to be released. So now it's debuting on the Another World Festival with Eaton, who also commissioned the Dreamrave installation. And I guess what was interesting, looking back now and where we're at, currently, it's like what Dreamwave was intending to do back then has become a lot more relevant and a lot more prescient to kind of just how we kind of live today. Because the whole notion of Dreamrave was to kind of create a sort of collective dreaming experience, right, that blends the virtual worlds and the physical worlds together, in which they create a sense of immersion and a sense of agency for people who were online to be able to kind of interact with a piece of a work that was able to kind of create a stream of consciousness through a web browser, but that also pumped in real time all these this data and information into the physical space itself from people around the world. So so yeah, it you know, this sort of kind of like blending of reality and virtual reality, you know, today is become strange because now we're locked in our little closets, and you know, we're even more online than ever before. You know, like we kind of live in a world now where, you know, truth has become untruth, you know, truth has become post-truth, and we, you know, it's hard to kind of define like what is real anymore, you know. And I think that, you know, it's almost to say that, you know, like the virtual reality has become even more real than real reality. You know, we experience a lot of these, you know, massive, you know, world-changing events through our little phones and our little computers, you know. And you know, we take part in these, you know, massive discussions. We take part in, you know, these huge protests that can change legislature and change kind of like, you know, the next 10 years. But, you know, we've all done this through, you know, basically our computers, you know. And the sense of agency is like, you know, it feels brand new to us. And I think it just kind of changed a lot of just how we think about things and how we kind of live. And I think, you know, that in all has been kind of very interesting to me. So I brought us all together for this discussion panel, just kind of talk about that, you know. And I think that, like, you know, as I was kind of thinking about it, I was thinking about this really funny anecdote that Millie told me about in quarantine, her little brother, who's like 11 or something. I guess actually, I mean, Millie, you can probably talk about more. I mean,
yeah, I was thinking.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So I went home during quarantine to visit my family's in Indiana, and I went home to Indiana for like a month or so, and my little brother is just like, we're just all quarantined at home, and he's 11, he just turned 12, but he's gotten really into gaming. And one day I kind of forced him to read a book with me, and then I went upstairs and his phone was just like going off on Discord. I was so confused. And I just see like all his like little text messages in this like Roblox group chat. Actually, I didn't even know it was Roblox. It was Adrian, and Adrian deciphered it. He was like, I think it's this. And then that like made all the connections. But he was like privately chatting this girl whose like screen handle was come slut 930. I was like, this is not a 13-year-old girl. And and my little brother was like, oh, this is my girlfriend. And then I was, oh my gosh. And then it kind of caused drama in my family. So he got all his electronics taken away for like 2 months. And then we made him delete all his like Discord accounts, and which is really funny because we thought we got rid of all the electronics. He has like 2 computers and a phone and a tablet. And then actually he took my computer from high school and like rebooted it and logged on and hid it under his pillow, which like in the middle of the night, I don't know what I was doing. It was like 3 a.m. I walked in, his like lights were on. I was like, what is he doing? He's like still chatting. And I was like, how?
Wow.
Yeah.
I definitely share that like computer survivalist instinct. That's definitely like, that's the new kind of being able to survive in the wilderness thing. It's like being able to like use any tech in the house. Like if someone has like a smart fridge or something like that, I bet your brother would be able to like work it out. Is it your brother? Sorry, I'm not sure if it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's gonna install Linux on the refrigerator at home and find a way to get online. Like
exactly.
Oh my gosh.
So I mean, you know, that story really struck me because, you know, like it kind of like, you know, epitomized like how we're kind of feeling today. You know, like the virtual reality has become even more real than our reality, you know, like for him to be able to chat with someone who him feels totally real, you know, on a, you know, this kind of like video game that came out in like 2006, 2007, right? You know, straight up to kind of like, it's just like basically like Minecraft like 1.0 type thing. Like it's such a bizarre thing to me. So as I was thinking about it, I just came up with this kind of just, you know, this topic, right? This notion. So I decided to name this talk Roblox Girlfriend, a discussion and disintegration of reality. And with that, I'd love to pass it to Millie. So she can talk a little bit more about that and just ask a few questions and just kind of banter a little bit for another hour or so.
I feel a little like on the spotlight with my little brother. But yeah, I guess it was really interesting, that event when it happened, because it felt really fast. And like the sequence of events is like I found out about that, and then I had to interrogate him, and then we had to kind of delete multiple different platforms that he was communicating with this one person. So it wasn't just like one platform, it wasn't just like Discord, it was like Snapchat, it was like Instagram, it was a bunch of other private chat messages, it was even Twitter. And it kind of is like this like online web identity that my little brother weaved of himself, which he was, you know, he was a 16-year-old with a different identity. And then yeah, even though, you know, we grew up and we still live in like this online space right now, for like an 11-year-old to have that kind of power, or like being so fluent in that space already, it was really interesting. And then having, for me to talk to my parents, who are, you know, from the other generation, to explain to them what like these platforms are, also to explain what her handle meant in Chinese was very was very difficult. And yeah, so that when Adrian approached me with saying that this was the title for this discussion and how it was gonna relate to Dreamrave, I thought it was very interesting, especially for like our current state. Like Adrian says, we're really plugged in, and we have, you know, people are doing like Zoom parties, like house parties on Zoom, the beginning of quarantine, and even now. But yeah, I had a few like questions that I brainstormed, like looking at the work that he's done, and then a Dreamrave project as well, and then just like questions overall about like virtual reality and the virtual space, and how, you know, art on the virtual space, like what does that mean versus art in our physical space, and then how do we talk about like the different ways that we communicate online and in person, and ultimately which is more authentic, which is more real, and is there like which is more truthful, I guess, as well. Yeah, if you want, I can just start reading off questions. Pick a few. Yeah, so I thought it would be interesting to start off with like what you guys as creatives in your different fields understand, like what is the virtual space, what is virtual reality, like is there a set definition, is there different like rules to that?
What is the virtual space? So I guess, so the reason I've always liked, so my sort of medium that I work in is music, but in any performance situation, nearly every performance situation, there is usually some kind of like sensory deprivation that happens. Like when you go to the theater, they turn down the lights and put the lights on the stage, and then there's like a set and things like that, and things to look at to focus your eyes, and everything's quiet apart from on the stage. There is this sense of suspending your disbelief, as it's known, and that sort of like, it's forcing you into this kind of like this state where you can accept things that you know not to be true but to be true, and that's how you sort of can get emotionally involved in something that you know isn't really happening, like a film, but your emotions can follow it along. It's because it really helps if you're in this environment that sort of makes you forget about the real world. That's something that I've always really liked about the rave environment, because it's the most extreme version of that. It's like a kind of sensory deprivation tank, but with entertainment kind of thing, and other people in there. And I feel like that space is that space, and that kind of basically like liminal space between reality and fantasy, is the kind of sweet spot for where you want to be to engage with a kind of artwork, where you're like fully suspended in your disbelief and you're not sure what's real and what isn't. So therefore you are willing to fully believe that the thing that you are seeing and experiencing is just like, it all is just real. And it doesn't, and you're just not even thinking about what's real and what isn't. And so the word virtual feels actually like quite an old-fashioned idea to me at this point, because it kind of states that it's fake. And if we are to be believing these ideas that we're talking about, that the virtual world is more real than the real world, which I get is a sort of a polemic idea, but I sort of get the gist. I think, yeah, maybe virtual's an inappropriate term for it, especially if it's a place where multiple people believe it exists, because that kind of does make something real in a way if it is like that. As much as it's not in the physical world, I think, especially like, one can't argue that the internet isn't a real space that can be colonized and controlled. I think, yeah, for me, yeah, the word virtual sort of puts a limitation on it, but I think what it means to me is this kind of like new unexplored frontier, which I personally think is the absolute future of where kind of entertainment and interaction and everything like that is going. You know, there's this sort of retrofuturism thing, like our idea of the future is always just a reflection of now. It never actually looks like what the future will really look like, because we have no idea. Like if, yeah, 60s future just looks like the 1960s, our future now just looks like now, but everyone's wearing tattered, slightly cyberpunk clothes, which is just what now looks like. And I believe there is no way in the 1960s they could have known what like 2010 would have looked like, because not enough people, well, there were people who were aware of the sort of like use of the internet and that kind of thing, but there wasn't sort of enough for kind of like shared consensus that people wouldn't actually want technology everywhere. People would like this idea of like the look of technology being very minimal and not everywhere. And I feel like the thing that we can't imagine about our future is the fact that there will be these shared spaces that aren't in the physical plane that we will believe are real and not virtual. And we don't know what they will look like or feel like, but they will engage all of our senses. And that for me is like the exciting thing about that side of things.
Yeah, I think it's
really
interesting that you relate. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, good.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I think it's interesting that you relate the word virtual to something that is not real, because I feel like, yeah, definitely there needs to be a reimagining of that word, or a reconsideration, or like a redefinition of that word. I think a lot of what people think about virtual is like a hidden, like mysterious, kind of like matrix-like space. And I think now, like you said, it's definitely something that is just like another side, another space that we go to, and is very much so real, that we see in now that those spaces are being policed. There's like many different rules to being in a community. There's many different rules to, the way that you kind of show yourself on the virtual space that may not be in the physical space. So I feel like in a way you're much more highlighted in the virtual space than you are in the physical space. And I thought it was nice that you touched on music and what you do, and how sensory deprivation kind of relates to feeling in those kinds of spaces. Do you feel that is what's happening in the virtual space? Like, because some senses are deprived, those spaces feel very different. They feel even more real. You're even more engaged, because as we find, when one of our senses are deprived, another one is like hyper fixated on.
Mm-hmm. There's a really good clip of this author called Michael Frayn trying out virtual reality for the first time, I think in the 1980s. And it's like crappy virtual reality, the way the way it originally looked. But he said a really interesting thing which relates to a screenshot of Animal Crossing that somebody uploaded on Facebook today, which is that, like, he said, I'm looking, it was just the inside of a house and like a really basic rendering of a house with one of those infinity horizons and just like a block blue color sky. And he was like, I'm looking at a house, but I don't feel any things that I normally feel when I look at a house, like how much it costs, or like if there's any worry about a mortgage or anything like that. I just see a pure house. And that to me is like quite an interesting idea, which is like a kind of melancholic beauty in these things. And the way it relates to this Animal Crossing image, it was just a picture of like somebody's character like sitting down in Animal Crossing, like in their kitchen area, and like everyone was writing like goals or whatever underneath it or something like that. But it was just like, it's not just like that people aspire to have a nice kitchen and sit down in it, it's that they want the unattainable simplicity of that character with basically no thoughts in its head, sitting in a nice room with absolutely no worries, because it's like that there aren't any really, like, apart from there is that sort of terrifying debt to Tom Nook in Animal Crossing. But I think there is something about the unattainable simplicity of a virtual sort of NPC's life, and except in that case it wasn't an NPC because they were playing as it. But yeah, I was talking to my friend the other day about how it's a kind of fantasy of mine to become like an NPC in my old age. NPC means non-playable character, by the way. So it's like in a video game, it's just like somebody who would randomly just talk to you and say, the cool air feels good, or something like that, and just has no other role in the game. And it's like, yeah, I was just talking about to my friend how I was like, it's quite a nice goal just to be an NPC in my old age and just stand in the park and just say ambient things to people and have that just be an atmospheric thing for other people rather than actually have my own concerns. I think that's a relevant aspect of the whole thing.
That's really cool, because it reminds me of, oh, sorry, Adrian, you go.
No, I was gonna say, I mean, it's really interesting as we're talking about virtual reality, and I guess like Danny, your critiques of like the notions of virtual reality being separate from reality, and I think it's true, but like it is an extension and very well connected with like our current reality, because it just because it's not tactile doesn't mean it's not there, But I think like as I think about kind of like internet spaces and virtual spaces and all that kind of stuff, like I don't know if you guys ever seen Watchmen, the TV show, but in that sort of like alternate reality, like the internet was never invented. Like there was ways for computers to kind of connect with each other and communicate with each other, but there wasn't in that reality like the internet as it is now, in which there are like spaces, sites, social media, all that kind of stuff, things that we think are just kind of like belong to us, right? Like just don't exist. And that just kind of like leads me to think like I always think about just kind of like the butterfly effect and just kind of like multiverses and stuff like that, like. And what's interesting is that like very specific to our reality is that we created this sort of virtual space. It's an entirely man-made meta reality, like, if we think about like, just spiritually, if someone was out there creating kind of like our reality that we exist, like with our sentience, like we created our own reality in a place that we feel even possibly even more comfortable in, because we are uncomfortable with what's around us, and it's a place that like we can be whoever we want, we can be like we can go on Animal Crossing and just vibe out on that chair and have no thoughts, but and we get drawn in, we can go on Roblox and have a girlfriend when we are 11 and can't get a girlfriend,
Yeah.
and it's such an interesting thing to me, it's like we've created a thing that's we've created a world that's kind of like just so much beyond potentially even more infinite, than the infinite reality that's already out there for us, that it kind of like is its own little dimension that sits upon ours, And so like to that end, I'm curious, like with Ian, as someone who creates interactive experiences, websites, and all that kind of stuff, you're kind of like the architect. Like you and yourself are able to create, your own reality within this meta reality, within the virtual space, and it's almost like you're just like a little baby god, right? Like how's that? How's that feel? I mean, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I really identified super strongly with what Danny was saying about kind of, to me, like even these earlier ideas of the virtual kind of describing a more, I would say, kind of like an aesthetic description of an experience, that the virtual was never not real, but it was always kind of a distinct mode. Like I'm even thinking to, there's the classic story of one of the first movies being shown is the train coming straight at the camera, and all the people in the theater, jump out of their seats and try and get away from the train that's rushing towards them. And I think that already shows that there isn't really that much of a difference between these so-called like virtual and real experiences. I don't think that anybody there felt like they weren't about to get hit by a train, even though they actually were. And so I really identify with this aspect of the virtual here being this kind of experience that you kind of think you're stepping into out of the real world in a sense. And I think like, going into the rave, kind of like stepping into this dark warehouse, and it opens up into this new environment that somehow is so different than the entire world around you. And then the second you step back out, you're kind of back out into the real world, even though it clearly, spatially exists within our world and all of these things are tied together. I think it's very much about the way an experience, relates to what your kind of normal everyday reality is. And so I think it's really interesting to look at how there have been so many different kinds of virtual experiences already that weirdly we're kind of returning to. I'm thinking a little bit of like multi-user dungeons or MUDs, which were very early group text-based experiences online that had like incredible resolution because they could use just text. They never had to make graphics. They didn't have to make 3D models for these things. So people could have these really close to real interactions in terms of the spaces that were there and the way the text described things and the kind of interactions you could have, but they were mediated through text. And I think especially then it was very clear that it was virtual because, you would sit down, you would turn your modem on, you would have the ritual of the noise of the modem dialing. And so it was this very clear kind of like isolated experience. It was kind of like, all right, I'm stepping into the virtual, and until I close my computer, I'm in the virtual. And then when I, leave that experience, now I'm back to so-called the real world. But I think what's happened is that these kind of multi-user experiences now are with us at absolutely all times. So in a sense, I think this kind of opportunity of stepping into and out of those kind of virtual experiences has disappeared. And what has made interesting is that now I think we're weirdly now creating new intentionally virtual experiences within our constantly virtual world in an interesting way. So I think we're already getting into this environment where we're kind of like nesting virtual within virtual within virtual. And I think the difference between each of those is, as Danny kind of mentioned, is like which experiences you're trying to heighten. Like what kind of a fake world are you trying to build in that sense? And so I think Dreamrave is really interesting because we kind of had what I would think of as kind of, one artwork that was experienced very differently by people in different places. And I think it was important that we didn't think of the web experience as secondary to the physical experience. Like no matter how you interacted with the work, both of those were 100% authentic and, to me, equally meaningful engagements with it. Whether you were looking at it from your computer, we tried to, make the website have some things that would heighten certain experiences to make that experience, virtual in the way we wanted, that you felt like you were in conversation with this chat bot that we had made. So you kind of have this weird communication with a creature you're not sure is real or is artificial. It had kind of had this aspect that would tie to time. So depending on when you came to the website, it might be in a different state depending on, what time it was in Hong Kong or what time it was where you are. So we're kind of heightening location and geography and communication-based, feelings while downplaying other components on the website. as opposed to the physical space where we were really, doing everything we could to absolutely heighten and make especially the physical experience, being with these mirrors and things like that, as disorienting as possible, in the same way that, you would step into this room and you knew you were kind of stepping into a singular, unreal experience for the time you were there. And then when you step back out, you kind of, left to this kind of nested virtual space.
Yeah, no, it's funny, but it's basically because humans need a very clear separation between what they think and feel is real and what they think and feel is a fantasy. And exactly as you said, the idea of like, I guess this is the sort of thesis of this whole chat, the thing that we're accepting as the real thing is actually becoming more and more kind of ornamented by fake things. For example, like a kind of just like video, like advertising boards, like any kind of moving images and those kind of the illusion of movement in a TV screen right now. Obviously in the future we're going to have like fucking projections on our irises and or like if you look into Neuralink and that kind of thing, there'll just be a sense of like, if for example there is a projected object sort of on the table and two people can see it because they're both part of the same Neuralink sort of network or whatever, there's like a vase on a table, there'll be a question of like, is that vase real? Like, and then you just sort of put your hand there and then you'll feel that it's not there, but you can both see it. And then it's like, so to what extent is the vase real or not? If it's there and you can both sort of look at it and talk about it, but it's not there in the physical plane, maybe there'll just be a new way of discussing things. Like it's like real in this way, but not real in that way. Like, but ultimately there does have to be a line, because humans, although we're capable of doing some clever things, have very sort of simple minds where it's like real fake, and it's like, I step out of the real and into the fake for this, and that's where the magic happens. And I think the desire to do that comes out of a desire for escape, I think, with a lot of people. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to raves and these things, and to entertainment, theatre and cinema, is to be out of yourself for a bit. And also a thing about that attracts people to having multiple identities on the internet is a thing, is just to sort of take a holiday in somebody else for a bit, and or like maybe in fact decide that you are somebody else in your entirety. That kind of journey can be like taken on the internet as well. Like that can be started or inspired or something like that. These kind of discoveries. And so like it's quite sort of Lacanian, really, isn't it? That sort of like that's what these spaces offer, this kind of like exploration of this kind of being that exists behind your eyes, this kind of like squidgy, amorphous, genderless thing that is this sort of identity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not very good at finishing these things, but
yeah. Like this aspect I think is interesting of now, like, even though I think in a lot of ways, in VR, if you wanted to watch a movie, you could just, perfectly project it on the inside of the screen. But I think what's interesting is all of these experiences you see that intentionally heighten the unreality of them to make them more legible, so that, a lot of people will make it seem like they're sitting in a fake real theater with a TV screen inside of their VR experience. I think is really interesting to me, because I think that helps. Like, I think that people, that's what they want in a way, and as you were saying, is kind of a clarity of what the fake part of this experience is. And by heightening that unreality, it makes it more virtual. And I think in that sense, maybe more useful for what people actually want out of these things, in that sense, that their goal is maybe not actually to disappear into another reality. They want the virtuality and the kind of
they want it to be a holiday. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
That kind of reminds me of this artist Joseph Kosa. Do you know that artist by chance, Adrian? Any of you? So I think he was in like, it was like very Dada, it was like 60s or 70s. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but he was talking about like what is the realist form of an object. So he had this one piece called 1 and 3 Chairs, which was like, it was a chair in the exhibition space. And then he had a description of a chair. and then he had a picture of a chair, and it was like, which is more real? All three of these is a chair, technically, and it was kind of like a huge like mind fuck for everybody walking through. But that's kind of similar to what you're talking about, like the virtual space, like multiple identities, like which one is more real? And I like what you said about the holiday. It's really cute.
Yeah, I've got a 2-year-old daughter, and so she's already incredibly fluent with technology and very aware of the fact that she can be recorded and reproduced, and that we can record her voice and put it into music. She's aware of what music is and that kind of thing. But it's quite an interesting thing that I saw her do the other day is or a thing that she does a lot, is because she was basically brought up entirely under COVID, the COVID period. Whenever she just kind of assumes that she can talk to anyone on any screen. So like when we just have the TV on or a film, she assumes that at any point we can just like talk to the people in the film or anyone like that, because like she's experienced an equal amount of FaceTime, and like some of it has been like, you know, we've been watching like stuff that friends of ours have done on the screen and stuff like that, but she hasn't established that kind of separation that we've got. So it's like, it's funny in the household, but simultaneously it's just interesting how to see that openness and think like, yeah, there's just a more of a freedom, because she's willing to accept more, obviously. Just a freedom, like just a sort of looseness with reality there. Just like, oh, hey, how you doing, like screen person? Just like, why not?
That reminds me of what's that film, Dogtooth, right? I'm sure you guys have seen that film, you know, and you know, the whole gist of the film is that, you know, these kids grew up in this, you know, this really bizarre household that, like, you know, with parents that was able to kind of shape their reality by just telling them things that are just untrue. And you know, they lived in this sort of like fake world, and it just, you know, became even more grotesque as the film goes on. But you know, that, you know, your anecdote about your daughter is so interesting, because you know, I'm just thinking about now, you know, kids who grew up within COVID, right? Like, you know, their whole perception of reality is going to be completely changed. You know, once they step out of, you know, if we ever step out of this sort of like COVID world, like, you know, how do they see the world differently? You know, like, they kind of like their first interaction with reality was like, you know, within their own homes, you know, and then, you know, the virtual space, which became infinite, right? Like, you know, they can talk to, you know, friends who, you know, around the world. They can, you know, they can think that like, you know, any sort of screen is interactive and touchable, and you can, you know, manipulate things, you can change things, you can do whatever you want, you know, but it's always, you know, within these little perfect little frames, right? And it's like it's always so interesting too, because it's like, you know, you look out the window and that itself is a frame. You can't just like you can't enter the screen, you can't exit the window in a sense of leaving the home, you know, in that sort of sense. Everything feels a little bit kind of just away from the grasp, you know, but it's still very much real. And I don't know, I just really wonder how just like human interaction, you know, how it's going to affect the people who are, I don't know, what's the next generation? That's the Zoomers after the Zoomers, or whatever that is, right? Like, what's that going to be like? You know, like kids who are,
Zoomers, aren't they?
You say what?
They're the real Zoomers, aren't they? Because they grew up with Zoom as the primary.
Exactly. You know, yeah. It's so weird to me. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? I mean, like, just the notion of living in a world that is just beyond our grasp, but is also just entirely malleable to what we can do, is, you know, this sort of weird, I don't know, dichotomy of agency, right?
I don't think people would like that. I don't think people like the idea of specifically the idea of being able to freely manipulate the world. I personally think people like an idea of just rules, that this is how things are. People like that kind of like security in their minds, as much as a lot of people, there are some people who would like the idea of being able to sort of like design their own world, but I think those people are fewer and far between than the people who just like want an idea of like, just give me the rules and I can choose to break them or follow them, but I just need everything to be straightforward.
I feel like what's also interesting is that like I feel like it's a generational thing, you know. Like I think that like we kind of like we kind of see it with like the boomers versus millennials versus like the zoomers, right? You know, the zoomers are going, you know, buck wild. They're you know, they love to just kind of like be contrarians and reshape like whatever, just like any other kid, you know, like reshape like and question what the rules they were kind of growing up in, you know, like, you know, creating new identities for themselves, you know, taking, you know, any sort of like gender roles binaries and just kind of like developing their own worlds and, you know, really just kind of pushing it is to be kind of like their set design structures and realities, you know. And I think it's a very beautiful thing. And I think for millennials are kind of like right in between, with which we kind of like you know, we're introduced to like the virtual reality, to kind of like identity, to, you know, all the structures that, you know, were given to us, you know, from, you know, past generations. And we're kind of like are trying to grapple with like what is the extent of control and agency within us, you know. And I think that like the generation afterwards, you know, like what's their whole thing. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like, to me, I feel like if you grew up and lived within, you know, a world of just pure rules and restrictions, but have this notion of virtual reality as being this kind of like, you know, Wild West space where you can kind of be wherever you want, do whatever you want, I feel like it's just going to be even more heightened, and there's going to be even more sort of this want for, I don't know, like agency creation, you know, world building, you know. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. Although the problem is spaces can only be Wild West for so long if there's any kind of monetizable element to them, especially that private companies will be building most of this stuff, which not sharing this kind of like tech utopia, which the original internet was very much built on.
Yeah, I just saw that Spotify just created, or I guess like one of the AI heads at Spotify created that new software that was able to basically like track and trace, or police like musical plagiarism, right? Like before it's actually plagiarized. So like it'll, I guess, like read this, you know, piece of music, and then it'll kind of like, you know, do whatever, you know, basically use AI and neural networks to kind of like trying to figure out, oh, if this melody sounds like this melody, or do this or that, you know. And that this idea of like internet policing, virtual policing, is kind of just, you know, slowly encroaching upon, you know, the reality, you know, like we can't, we're no longer able to create as we once were, because, you know, a little robot says we can't, you know, which sucks.
But then with that too, with like the increased like surveillance state, like you said, the little robot, it's interesting that also blends into our reality, because, you know, it's people who are making these algorithms that are making AI systems. It's not just like, you know, this like imaginary virtual thing. So that's another way it's connected to our reality. It's like the more that the virtual is being policed, it's the same thing as a reality, because the people who are doing the policing exist in real life. They just have a different identity.
That's interesting, because I think like it goes back to what we were just talking about with like this want for control, right? Like, you know, I think in the end, it's like, you know, it's the humans, like Millie is saying, it's the humans who want to be able to kind of like control and police everything, you know, and they create, you know, little machines to do all the work for us, you know, like a little like those like shitty little like robot guys, robot policemen who roam around Dubai or something, you know, like it's like it's a sort of like, you know, we can't possibly police enough, like there are not enough eyes, so we gotta create even more eyes and more arms, and, you know, it's strange. And I think that like I feel like it's human nature to want to be able to kind of, you know, control. It's just like, I think it's just like this inherent want for selfishness. Like, I always go back to kind of like, I have this like really just depressing kind of idea of like, you know, consciousness and humanity, in which like I feel like the greatest curse that, you know, any organism is kind of given is like, you know, this consciousness itself, because for every being, it's like we're like designed to want to, you know, be self-sustaining and survive, you know. But once we gain consciousness, we're able to kind of like take that to the extreme, you know, like, okay, like now I can survive, I can eat, you know, more berries, I can eat, you know, do this, I can, have more kids. I can populate the world. Like, it's like, I think like once you kind of understand the limits of your power and, and what you can do to extend it, it's just going to be this, this inherent just want for just get more. And I think that kind of goes all the way back to just kind of like why we created this sort of like, virtual utopia, right? To kind of like create a new reality that we can all kind of like live and be whoever we want, yeah, real depressing.
Yeah,
but also, sorry, Ian, yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, like I think the discussion around like rules and policing is really interesting because maybe it points to an aspect of like, maybe the primary difference in the quality of these kind of spaces is, the degree of agency you're allowed. Then I think you're right, Danny, in the sense that I don't really think most people want to constantly be constructing their own reality. And I think in that sense, you kind of only have to look at, say, the number of players of Fortnite, which I would say is, certainly a space for play, but is not really a space for creation. You can't build things and keep them over time. The world resets after the end of every game, as opposed to, I would say like the relatively very small number of people who are really still in a space like Second Life, where you really do have this opportunity to like truly create things. And I think it's interesting that in both of those spaces too, you do kind of see a gradient of the number of rules that are necessary. That, in Fortnite, they have these very complicated anti-cheating systems that are analyzing your network packets and making sure you're not doing things that a human couldn't do, that it's really controlling the kind of experiences and the way you're allowed to engage with the space, as opposed to when Second Life has none of that, because it doesn't matter if you cheat. Like if you cheat, it's your universe. Why not cheat in the world you've made? It doesn't really matter. And I do think it's interesting that maybe what's different about virtual is that you can move seamlessly between these things. You close one application open and another. There's no real friction between being able to move between these spaces. Whereas in the real world, certainly, as our economy continues to decline, like that kind of agency of choice of the amount of rules that are imposed upon you in your environment are much harder to move between, if not impossible for some people. So I certainly think that's a very large appeal of, and maybe an aspect of, what makes these experiences a virtual or not, I guess.
Also, something else that occurred to me is the advent of these controllable environments. I was thinking of Minecraft as well in terms of these places where you can create permanent structures, has given opportunity to certain kinds of people. And I know there's a large contingent of autistic people who find Minecraft to be like an enormously satisfying thing to use because it is a world that makes sense to them, where they can control it all. And I know it's often a cause of stress to exist in this world where there's obvious constant misunderstandings happening with certain autistic people, and so Minecraft has provided an enormous relief to these people. And there's people I know who aren't necessarily autistic but have this desire to control worlds and situations, who for quite obvious reasons love these games where you get to have this world that is where everything is under your control. And I think that's a very interesting use of these platforms, and something that previously took more imagination, like something like Dungeons and Dragons is an equivalent where you get, if you were to write your own story or whatever, but this is kind of an expansion of the same thing. And as things develop, will sort of, only get more intense.
Yeah, I feel like I think a good kind of analog to that is like GTA 5, right? GTA 5 has been around, how long's it been? Like at least like 8 years now? It's been around for a very long time. I think that like the only reason why, it's more, I don't even know, man. It's like now that it's on 3 different generations of consoles is wild. But like I think the reason why it's still remained popular is that like, it's just kind of like it's such a close kind of analog to kind of our reality, and like it emulates like LA, right? And but in this world you can kind of do whatever you want. And I think like this, with the story mode of like GTA was like, was probably the closest to kind of like real life as you can probably get, aside from all the killing and stuff like that. But like,
with GTA, it's really interesting. Like when there was that capacity, which one was that? Was it GTA 4? Where there was that big debate about the fact that you can kill prostitutes in it. You can sort of have an interaction with the prostitute and then you kill her and then get your money back, basically. So like just from a tactical game like situation, it makes sense to do it, but it's actually like the argument is that that's condoning like a morally dreadful thing to do. The game argument was that like, well, in the sense that you can go and do that in real life if you want, but you can choose not to. It's like as simple as that. But there's it's just GTA is such an interesting, it opens up such an interesting like discussion in exactly that department. I mean, if you think about it though, it's a game where like all the mechanics are designed around you for you to be able to steal a car. It's not like you can do anything that you can do in real life in GTA. It's like it's largely designed around you getting a gun and shooting people, stealing a car. Like it is designed, like it's pushing you in that direction. It's not just like
it's the name of the game.
It literally is. It's not a neutral game in that respect. I mean, I'm not actually arguing against the existence of it, but I'm just saying like it's to avoid that fact would be silly. But yeah, no, it's that for me was a really interesting area of discussion. That sort of that idea or illusion of freedom in a game, and then how that applies to real life.
Yeah, totally. And I think that like with the advent of like, GTA Online, right? Like the reason why it kind of just is still popping off is that like they just kind of keep giving kind of like, players even more ability to customize and do, get more content. And, like I'm looking at like, GTA when it first came out and GTA now, right? Like it's a totally different game, right? Like, like I'm seeing like on GTA Online, like you can like fly like these insane cars and like, everything just feels a lot more cartoonish, right? Like, like character creation has become like just even more wild. And I think that like this sort of like this increased freedom of like kind of like, surreality, something that's even more, I guess, like started as real, right? And it's become even more kind of like comical and fictional, it's kind of a draw for a lot of these sort of like, virtual spaces, like, because it's I think it's almost like inherently always drawn to that. It's like we want something to be, once we kind of have it too close to kind of reality, it's kind of what's the uncanny valley thing. Once it's too close to reality, it becomes kind of like weird and just kind of strange to us. But then once it's kind of like takes reality and has elements of surrealism, right? Just like Minecraft, right? Like the simplicity of it, it takes a lot of the real world physics, real world environments, but then reduces the blocks, right? That's like it simplifies the world, and I think that's what makes it so beautiful and interesting, so I don't know. I think in that sense, it's like I feel like with just the overall notion of virtual reality, it's like maybe it's just like it's this idea of like simplification, taking what we find to be real and trying to get down to kind of like a Silicon Valley, head ass type of thing, right? It's like you're trying to make everything easier for us, but this want to kind of make everything easier has kind of actually made everything seem more complicated, where it's just like inherently moved us towards surveillance states, inherently moved us towards kind of like, policing of music creation, of content creation, of like, freedom of speech, of doing anything really, all because like we've created different machines and different, things that help us kind of like police our world,
And I think it's definitely an unintended artifact of or consequence of our age, with the sort of people who are kind of being very pessimistic about surveillance states and surveillance in general. I really do not think anybody would have predicted that people would be broadcasting all of their information online with the advent of social media. Because there was an idea of privacy pre-internet that doesn't really exist anymore. Like I've never really seen it, apart from like with some people like kind of like talking about it but never doing it. And the idea of like where surveillance comes into it, the fact that like we're just putting everything up for grabs. I think the spooky thing about surveillance for me is just the thought and the argument against, because I've spoken to lots of people about surveillance, and a lot of people I speak to are like, I love TikTok spying on me. It's hilarious. And I, as much as I really enjoy that sense of humor, it's not the fact that they're spying on you, it's the fact that they can just get anything from you, and if any company that wants your data to makes it seem like you've done something or something like that, they just can. Like, for example, like the NSA can literally like frame somebody or like find information that they can sort of like paint a narrative with or something like that. It's that use of surveillance that I find a bit more spooky, rather than necessarily just the act of it in itself. It's the sort of agenda of the people who have the information that you don't have control over, I guess is my point.
Yeah. All right, go ahead, Ian.
I was going to say that, like, and extending that maybe with what Adrian was saying earlier about simplification, like, to me, it maybe seems that it's like my personal read on it is not so much that it's simplification, but it's that like an intensifying. And I think it kind of goes back to this, what Danny was saying, in the very beginning about with the raves, where you're kind of subtracting things. And I think when you subtract all of these things, it like intensifies the experience. Like, I think the GTA 5 example was great because, like, I hate driving in LA normally, but I love driving in LA in Grand Theft Auto 5. So it's very clear that this is not, trying to actually replicate the experience of driving in LA, which sucks. It's trying to create, some intensified version of the parts of it that are enjoyable, which is, occasionally the speed, the setting, feeling like you're moving through space in this very satisfying way. And I think that really ties very clearly also to these aspects of surveillance that, even back to, feudal times, you would have to, pay some percentage of your, goods and taxes to people. So they would have to be tracking you in some capacity, tracking what you were doing. And I think what we're seeing is, that those things just continue to intensify, that it's really still a part of this kind of spectrum of, the ability of making things happen easier intensifies the amount of things about you that are being tracked. So it's, again, not necessarily kind of, that we weren't being tracked in the real and now we're being tracked in the virtual, but the amount of tracking and the kind of tracking is intensified in these very specific ways.
No, it's really interesting. And it comes back to this idea of like, how simple humans are versus how complicated technology and the situation we find ourselves in. And that humans basically have the same wants and desires and feelings as we have done for however long we've existed. I think first humans were like, 20,000 years to get first evidence. And then like recorded history is like, what is it? It's like 5,000 years if you go back to like Scarabrae and that kind of thing. But it's just like, it's just the same stuff, but technology makes it faster. That's my point.
Yeah, and I think this idea of simplification is going back to it's like, because in the beginning with like social media and all this stuff, it's like, what we really want to do was connect with our mom in like, I don't know, like in Alabama or something, right? Or talk to my friend in California when I'm here, and like it like as it kind of time went on, like it was like, okay, like if I can do this to people I know, I can do this with strangers, right? And how do I connect with other strangers and start kind of, connect people that I don't know, but are personalized to me, And so we start creating our profiles for ourselves. And, we basically started to kind of like compartmentalize and simplify like, groups of people, like if you go on Twitter, right? Like, the algorithm there always, feeds us kind of people who are like-minded, we create these sort of like little bubbles for ourselves. It's very difficult for us to kind of get out of, like I always see the same tweets from like, like Jabuki or something or whatever, just because like 20 of my friends love that tweet and it's hilarious, it's like, but like, I remember there was this anecdote, I forgot who it was, but there was some researcher who tried to kind of basically connect with people who were like outside of like their little bubbles, right? To kind of like get, basically like they try to like kind of understand what the world was with the alt-right, right? And it became very difficult because, they were unable to get past this algorithm, they just kept getting fed just the same types of people and creating these sort of like, echo chambers of information. And it kind of goes all the way down to just kind of like, this notion of simplification, right? It's like, we want human connection. We want people who are like-minded. So we created robots and things to kind of help us get there. But then what it actually did was that, like, you know, the creation of these sort of like little bubbles is actually creating kind of little cells for us that, you know, simplified, you know, identity into just little check boxes, you know, and we kind of like started to use all this stuff, you know, not just to kind of like communicate with others, but also to, you know, like, as something as dumb and, you know, as like just with just capitalism, just a sell to, you know, like, you know, like you go to a mall and like you can basically like use little cameras on, like, I just found out that it's like a few years ago, those little cameras that are on the little screens, right? They like are able to kind of read people based on like their, you know, their gender and like, you know, just kind of like their age, right? Like really simple things, but then once they see it, they can feed them the right sort of ads, you know, and the same thing happens online, you know, the same thing happens on social media. They kind of take just whatever you fed to the system and then gives you personalized content, you know. And it's just like this oversimplification of our world that's kind of created a world that's even more just, yeah, again going back to the topic and thesis of this one, it created a surreality that's like a reflection of our world, but even potentially even more complicated, you know.
Yeah, and that's kind of like putting everybody into their own individual echo chamber in what they think is reality. Like if their face is being read by a machine that's then feeding them a certain ad, they think anybody's going to see that, anybody at that checkout's going to see that ad, when in fact it's just for them, and they don't even realize that their reality is being fed to them by an algorithm in that sense. So like what they have in the very much real category is actually a reality that has been built by a computer to a certain extent. Also, in terms of what you're talking about with human connection and the desire for it, is that relates to what I was saying at the beginning with regards to that sort of sensory deprivation thing and the particular kind of connection that is made possible by a rave, which is like, for me personally, I've never really, I've always listened to music in headphones, and I've never really been like up for that kind of like everyone in the same moment, like festival style of listening to music, like listening in crowds of people, or like singing with loads of people, or looking at each other and that kind of thing. I can't really have that moment. I've always been like experienced the pleasure of music just like in my own head, like as a relationship between me and the music. And of all live music experiences, I've always found a rave to be the one that reflects that experience in a crowd setting in the way that I find them like the most like satisfying. And because it's very isolating being at a rave because it's so dark, but you know that there's other people there and you get flashes of them, but there's not this kind of like weird like social thing that you have to kind of like social sort of dance that you have to do with people, for want of a better word. And it allows you to have that personal experience with the music, yet amongst other people, a sense of like being isolated, but in a crowd with other people. And this is a very particular kind of connection that is also made possible by online spaces. And also, I don't know if any of you have played the game Dark Souls 3. There's this or like even in fact in Dark Souls 1, there's this sort of idea that was pioneered by the creator Hidetaka Miyazaki, who this idea of runes. I mean, there's loads of ideas of connecting people in this game, but it's a specific kind of connection of everybody playing this single player game, which is just very much you on your own sort of going through this world. But there are a number of ways in which people can sort of interact whilst maintaining a kind of strange distance from you. So you can leave these runes on the floor and you just write something and then you leave it in front of, for example, like a boss fight, and it says like danger ahead or something like that. And then you get a notification if somebody is like giving your rune like a thumbs up or whatever, but you don't know who's going to read it at what point. It's just going to be sent to someone else's game, like in the wilderness of just like the abyss. And you just have no idea what's going to happen, but you're just leaving a message for like another person somewhere. And there's, as a result, a lot of in-jokes that have accumulated in the game as a result of what you can write is very limited to sort of like these kind of like selection boxes that the game has, but people have still found ways to get like sex humor and toilet humor into those references, like if there's a corpse dangled over a sort of balcony, somebody would classically write "try finger butt hole" in that context. But the kind
Like
of beauty of it
fringe
is
poetry.
exactly literally that. But the beauty of it is that it's like fridge poetry that you like put onto a fridge that you just push out into the sea for someone else that you don't know to see. That's the kind of cool element of it, and it gives you this like strange, like quite like fun sense of connection with someone that you have no idea who they are. And also there's another fantastic mechanic of invading other people's single player games, which is kind of amazing, so that somebody's just trying to complete the game on their own, and then you can just like completely disrupt what's happening. You can go in there, you can help them if you want, but you can also just like ruin the whole situation for them and kill them. And there's just and it's just sort of like is a fantastic sort of injection of energy into the game. But then there's like very strict rules about how the invasion can work, and then you sort of disappear, and then their game continues as it was, but there was just this sort of bizarre disruption from someone else. And yeah, all those elements I think are really fun and innovative new ways of interacting that, to my mind, are very sort of rare outside of a space like the internet.
Yeah, certainly it sounds like definitely like many experiences I've had like at Rave as well, like you were saying, that it's kind of like, it's not really that you're necessarily there to socialize for long periods of time, but you may have this like very unusual, intense 3 to 4 minute interaction with somebody as you're crossing paths in the dark, kind of. You notice they have a weird t-shirt and you make a joke and something happens.
Yeah, like these sort of island-like experiences.
And it's like implicitly, it's like, oh, I'm not going to come find you later. We're not going to hang out after this. This was the beginning and the end of our little engagement here, kind of.
Yeah, that sort of simplicity of it. It's that's a great thing as well. Absolutely.
What time is it? 1:50. I mean, I think we should end in an hour. But Millie, do you have any last thoughts before we kind of like close this off?
No, we surprisingly touched on all the questions I had.
Yeah, I'm looking at the questions too, and I'm like, yeah, we didn't even touch these, but we did in theory, in our minds.
We got all of them actually. So
did we? Oh, we did. You know what? Yeah, the virtual.
Yeah, we did.
Magic. No, I mean, it is truly magic. I think that, like, you know, I think just kind of like to close the whole conversation off, I think, like, I don't know, I think in essence, you know, like, we've created a world that is, you know, all in all is always going to be just kind of at our own choosing, right? It's like, regardless, we're kind of like the, what's that mean? Like, we're the thought, like we're the main characters of our own stories, right? And it's like, you know, is it a multiplayer experience? Is it a single player experience? You know, I guess it's kind of like hard to say, right? But I think as we kind of like go further and just kind of like our new sort of, you know, reality of, you know, being our own silos and then finally being released down to the wilderness, right? Like, what is the new sort of like the other world that we're kind of creating? And what is the sort of the new generation, you know? And I think that, like, you know, the whole, for, you know, the festival that we're, you know, part of Another World, right, is it's this whole notion of, like, you know, trying to find different speakers and different people and filmmakers, artists, you know, whoever, to have different ideas of, you know, world building, you know, of creating a world that we feel that is more, you know, idealistically, you know, a more just world, you know. And what is that sort of thing, you know? Like, does it live in the virtual space? Does it live in our space? Is it one and the same? I don't know. I mean, it's a very sort of like nebulous and cloudy thing, but I guess the only thing we can hope is that, you know, it'd be a fruitful one. So
it was very poetic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I, for one, welcome our new Elon Musk overlords and look forward to becoming an NPC in the Neuralink universe.
Yeah. I'll see you in the Hyperloop. Maybe like Danny will be like the greeter at the Hyperloop, you know.
Hi, this is my audition for the Hyperloop.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Hyperloop.
But anyway, thanks guys. I mean, it was great seeing you guys on all those screens. And Ian and Millie, I've seen you IRL, but Danny, I literally have not seen you since Hong Kong. Honestly, I really want to go back whenever that's going to be, whenever they let us out of our little location in the world. I heard you're getting a new house too, right? Right, Danny? You got a new, love that. I mean, that's going to be crazy.
Yep, no, I'm looking forward to it. Space for the PS5 that I have not got yet. I'm very looking forward to that.
Oh hell yeah! I still haven't gotten mine yet. I refuse to get a new console until like one of those brand new ones until like at least a year, because like they always kind of like janky and shit, you know.
Yeah, no, until the post-release glamour has faded, I will not get one. I think that's a good rule, actually.
Yeah, it's always kind of buggy at first, and then yeah. But anyway, thank you very much.
Very nice to see you, Adrian.
Yeah, hope I'll see you soon in the virtual world. The virtual rave, baby.
Nice to meet you, Millie. Nice to see you, Ian.
Well, nice to
see you, Danny.
Nice to meet both of you.
Yeah, such a pleasure.
See
So
ya.
nice to catch up with everyone.
I know.
See you guys.
Beautiful. Love y'all.
See ya.